Today we'll talk about language modeling. We'll also talk about the GPT architecture, the first in the series in the family of GPT models. And then we'll talk about we'll talk about decoding strategies, which actually is applicable not just to GPT but in general to any large language models, right? So these are the three broad topics that we'll cover in this week. So let's start with the first topic, which is language modeling, right? So let's just look at where we are in the course right now. So in the previous lecture, we learned about the components of the transformer architecture, right? And we did that in the context of machine translation, where I said that I have this English sentence and I want its translation in Hindi or Tamil actually, and how do we do it, right? And we saw all these components, which is the input embeddings, the positional embeddings, then the multi-head attention, feed-forward network. And in the case of the decoder, we had this masked attention. And then we also had these added layers, which were the residual connections and the normalization to ensure better training and convergence and so on. It's all of this we saw. And we were mainly focusing on machine translation, right? Now, the question that I want to start with is before I go to the question, right? So I could think of that entire zoomed out version of the encoder and decoder, or I could just work with this abstraction where you could think of the transformer architecture that we were learning in the context of machine translation as an encoder and decoder. The encoder takes an input and produces an output, and the output is typically a distribution over the vocabulary, and I would have a sequence of such outputs, right? So that's one level of abstraction of how you can think of the transformer architecture if we delete all those details about what is position embeddings and all that. If you just abstract all that out, okay, that all exists, I don't care about it, it's just an encoder and decoder, right? That's one view. And even more abstraction is like you even forget about encoder decoder, just think of this entire thing as one transformer block which takes an input, which is text in our case. In this course we'll largely be talking about text, and then it produces a text in the target language in the case of machine translation, right? So now if you work with this abstraction, the next question that I can ask is, what if I want to use the same transformer architecture for other NLP tasks, right? And here are examples of a few NLP tasks. Typically you would have some input and some output. So you could think of the task of sentiment analysis, where you would have some input sentence or paragraph, and your job would to be predict the class, whether it's positive, negative, neutral, right? Or you could think of summarization, where you've given a large paragraph as input and you maybe want a 1 or 2 line summary of it, right? So the input is a sequence of words and output is also a sequence of words, and that's exactly what we had in translation. The input was a sequence of words in one language and the output was a sequence of words in another language. Whereas in summarization, you have a sequence of words in the same language and the output also is a sequence of words in the same language, right? Unless you're doing cross-lingual summarization, which we are not talking about right now, right? And then if you could also think of the task of question answering, where you're given a paragraph, then asked a question, and you need to highlight the answer in the paragraph, right? So that also you could think of it as the input being the paragraph and the question, and this being fed to the transformer architecture and it's generating an answer, or just telling you among all these tokens which has the highest probability of being the answer. Right? So if you look at all the tokens in the input paragraph, which token has the highest probability of being the answer or the sequence of tokens, right? So that's the other way you could look. All of this can be abstracted into this input-output form, with the transformer acting as the function which maps the input to the output, right? And this function has these parameters theta, which are the parameters wk, wq, wv, the feed-forward network parameters, and then repeated across all the layers, right? So that is the way you could look at it. But now if this is what you want to do, if you want to use a transformer architecture for multiple NLP tasks, then this is what you would need. You would need a data set for each of these tasks. So you have the data and you also have the labels associated with them, right? So here's the input, here's the summary. Here's the input, here's the label of positive, negative, neutral. Here's the input and the question, and here's the answer, right? So you'll need this labeled data, and then if you have this labeled data, you could think of training a transformer architecture for doing this, working with this abstraction that we have on the slide, right? But the challenge there is, if we train it from scratch, right? The transformer architecture, if you remember, was fairly large architecture. We also, I think, computed a number of parameters, and there were many parameters in the architecture. And if you're going to train this from scratch, that means randomly initialize all the parameters in the model. That's what training from scratch means. And then use your training data and the appropriate objective function to train the parameters of the model, right? So then it will take a lot of time to converge, or it will take a lot of data to train all these parameters, a large number of parameters that you have, right? And often for many tasks, you will not have labeled data at that scale, right? You would have smaller number of samples, right? If you take the case of Hindi, for example, how many question answering data sets do you really have out there? How many sentiment analysis training data do you really have? Not much, right? So then how do you train these large architectures for doing that, right? So that's the question that we want to address, right, in this lecture. Okay. And preparing label data is of course very laborious and costly, right? You have to hire human annotators. It's a skillful job, which means that the annotators come at a premium, and also it takes some time to create this data, especially if you think of tasks like translation or question answering or summarization and so on. Right? On the other hand, while labeled data is costly, we have tons of unlabeled data on the internet, right? So if you think of entire Wikipedia, so many English articles, not as many Hindi articles, but still a lot of Hindi articles. If you look at the news corpora on the web, like even if you look at Indian languages, so much news content in multiple languages gets published on the net, right? Then you would have books which are uploaded on websites like Wikibooks or Archive, Internet Archive, where you could get these books and you would have a lot of unlabeled data. Why am I calling it unlabeled data? Because this is just text. It does not say that, hey, paragraph 1 in book 2 is actually talking something positive. Or here's a question that I have asked on the paragraph 1 in book 3 and here's the answer. All that is not there. It's just large collection of text, right? And Wikipedia, books, blogs, news, all of this is available on the net. And this is available for free. I mean, assuming it's not copyrighted and so on, right? So it's all available for free, most of it, Wikipedia and all of these. Can we make use of such unlabeled data to train a model, right? Now this question itself looks funny, right? Because if it's unlabeled data, then how will I use it for training? All the training that we have seen in the previous course was labeled data, right? So you have image, you have the class, and you pass the image as the input. You have a loss function which tries to maximize the probability of the correct class, and then you backpropagate, right? Similarly, if you have sentiment classification, you have input text, you have the label, you have a loss function which tries to maximize the probability of the correct label, and then you backpropagate, right? So you always have a label to guide the training. But now if I have unlabeled data, of what use can it be to help me train the model, right? Just because there is large amount of it available, does that mean it's good? Because it's not labeled, right? And that's exactly the idea that was proposed almost 6-7 years back now. It's of course using unlabeled data is a much older idea than 6-7 years back, but it was proposed in the context of transformers 6 to 7 years back, and that was the BERT model, among the first few models to use that. There were models before that also, but that was one of the first popular models to use it, and that's the idea that we want to understand first, right, through these first 2-3 weeks of the course. Okay. So now can we make use of these unlabeled data to train a model? What will be the training objective in that case be? Because I told you there is no label given. Then what are you going to maximize? What is the probability that you are going to maximize if there is no label given to you, right? And would that be helpful in adapting the model to downstream tasks? Because that's where I started with, that hey, this transformer architecture looks very good. It looks very generic. You can abstract it as input output. Use it for all the NLP tasks, where everything you can think of it as an input, the class you can think of it as output, but you don't have enough labeled data, hence you cannot use the transformer architecture. So now if I'm asking you to use unlabeled data, first I have to tell you how to use it. That's the first question, what will the training objective be? And once you use that, if you go down that path, does it really reduce the amount of data required for subsequent tasks, right? So these are the two questions that we need to understand. Are the questions clear to everyone? Is that making sense? Okay, good. So with that background, let us start the first topic, which is language modeling. Okay. So here's the motivation, right? So now assume that we ask some questions to a layperson, right? Like an average person, and you ask the following questions to him, right? Him or her. wow, India has now reached the moon. Is this sentence expressing a positive sentiment or negative sentiment? Right? Think of all the people that you know, right? All the people that you have interacted. If you ask this question to them, right? Of course, they need to understand the language, but you can translate it to whatever language. Will they be able to answer it? Yes, they'll be able to say this talking something positive. Okay. Now, here's another article which says that what sets this mission apart is the pivotal role of AI in guiding the spacecraft, blah, blah. Now, I ask a question. Did the lander use AI for soft landing on the moon? Right? Will anyone be able to answer this? Most people that you know will be able to read this paragraph and answer that. Yes, no? Okay. And he likes to stay, he likes to stray, he likes to sway. Are these meaningful sentences? Right? If you ask people who know this language, right, the average person that you know, he or she will be able to answer that. Right? And the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't train for these tasks. Right? It's not that sometime in class 8, class 9, you were showed a lot of reviews and said, hey, this is positive, this is negative, this is positive, this is negative, right? Or of course, comprehension you all did. That's one task that you have done. But many of these tasks you are not really trained for, right? But still, if you talk of an average person, right, who has perhaps not even had schooling at that level, right, but just understands, just knows how to read and write and so on, they'll be able to answer these questions quite easily, right? So why does that happen? Why is it that they are able to answer this? Right? The idea is that through our interactions over a period of lifetime, right, we get a very strong understanding of language through just our daily interactions, right? So we see someone shouting, using certain words when they shout, and we know that, okay, if I see those words, that's negative, that's anger. We see people appreciating each other, like, or saying, okay, this is good, this is bad. We hear certain words at that time. Now, if you see those words in some other context, we know this is positive, this is negative, although no one has explicitly told us this, right? So just by interacting with a large amount of language data, which as humans, we don't even think of it as data, right? It's just a part of our daily interactions. But what we're doing is consuming a lot of language data through these interactions, not just interactions, reading, watching videos, watching movies, watching all of this, right? Wherever language is coming into us, right? And we just become good, we get a very solid understanding of language. And that makes us better at these very refined tasks without anyone explicitly teaching us how to do those tasks, right? Does that make sense? Yes. So now can we use this same idea that can a model develop a basic understanding of language by getting exposed to a large amount of raw text? That is what is happening in your case. You are getting exposed to a large amount of raw text, right? Most cases, your parents, your teachers, your relatives or friend circle, when they are talking to you, they are not teaching, hey, I'm asking you a question, now you have to answer. They're not saying that. They just start talking and you know what needs to be done, right? Just by being exposed to a large amount of text content, right, in spoken, written form. So can we do the same? Where is this raw text going to come from? The internet, right? All the corpus that I was showing you, Wikipedia is there, news is there, blogs are there, books are there. Can we use all this large amount of raw text for pre-training, right? So that's where the motivation comes from. And now if we do that, after getting exposed to a large amount of language data, can the model perform well on downstream tasks which are specialized by requiring very little supervision on those tasks? I showed a few examples of, hey, this is what question answering looks like, this is what sentiment analysis looks like. Now the definition of few here is subjective, right? What do you mean? But relatively fewer, as opposed to what it will take, like a new person who does not know anything about language, now you try to teach it sentiment analysis. You have to start from very, very basics, right? You have to tell us what are good words, what are bad words, what are words itself, maybe you'll have to sort of explain and so on, right? So it will become quite difficult to do that, right? But if that person has a grasp of language, maybe this will become easier. So what is the equivalent of grasp of language for a machine, right? How do you make that happen? That's the idea of pre-training. How do you make it into a mathematical formulation, right, which just lets the machine get exposed to a large amount of text, get an understanding of language, and then arguably it can get better at downstream tasks with limited exposure to supervision. Okay, so that's the two stages that you keep hearing about: pre-training and supervised fine-tuning, right? So I've introduced these two terms. I'll delve into them again in slight more depth. For now, I'll just leave you with these raw ideas about what is pre-training, what is fine-tuning. Okay, so this is what we are talking about pictorially, right? So you have a large amount of raw text. You do what is known as language modeling, right? And that's pre-training to make the model aware about language. And then you have small amount of samples and labels, the supervised data that we were talking about. And then you make the model learn some of these downstream tasks. This is the fine-tuning stage. And when people did this, right, and this I'm showing you some plot for sentiment analysis, they found that by doing this kind of a two-stage thing where you have pre-trained the model on large amounts of text and then fine-tuned on in-task data, they were able to get an accuracy of say around 92% for sentiment analysis, which is better than the state of the art on that data set at that time. Right? These are all point-in-time claims. It would have changed by now. This would have been better even or so on. But that's the idea, right? And this, it was able to match the performance of previous supervised systems. When I say supervised systems, I mean just this, right? There is no pre-training, just the supervised fine-tuning. So the previous supervised systems, which were just using a lot of sentiment analysis labeled data, they are able to match their performance at 30x to 100x fewer labels, right? So that's the intuition that we wanted, that if I have learned a lot about the language with minimum data, I should be able to do these, learn these tasks well, and that is what was shown by some of the earlier works. You can click on the references and see what the papers talk about, right? Okay, so that's the motivation behind what is known as pre-training. Now, what is the connection between pre-training and language modeling is something that we will see next.